So let's talk about Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, the mastermind behind January 6th. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison for seditious conspiracy. Now you have people like the Krasenstein brothers on X, formerly known as Twitter, that think 2 decades in prison is a suitable sentence. You had Ed Krasenstein go as far as to compare Enrique to Hitler and Bin Laden. Now, and the reason I bring up the Krasenstein brothers is because they are a perfect example of leftists who agree with and advocate for fire and brimstone punishment for actions that would be classified as classy felonies at most. But when it comes to the BLM riots, they call them protests and dismiss comparisons as whataboutism. No, I wouldn't be surprised if they held January 6th to the same degree as 9/11. 9/11 too. 9/11 harder, as some put it. And how people make that comparison, I don't know. No one died at the hands of the protesters on January 6th. No one was kidnapped. No one was imprisoned. And as much as they want you to believe this was an orchestrated event by individuals who wanted to keep President Trump in power, that is simply not the case. Yes, people got hurt, and those individuals who attacked people deserve to go to jail. The individuals who destroyed public property deserve to go to jail. The individuals on the front side of the Capitol who did not have permits to demonstrate a protest and chose to disregard barriers deserve to go to jail. What they did was very offensive and it warrants punishment. But do I think they deserve 5 to 10 years in prison? No, not at all. Just like I don't think Enrique Tarrio deserves 22 years in prison. They wanted to give him 33, by the way. No, what did Enrique do to deserve 22 years in prison? He wasn't leading the so-called troops to storm the Capitol. No, he was banned from Washington, D.C. by a court order because he burned a BLM flag. So if he wasn't there in person to lead the charge, how do you link him to the crime that he conspired with individuals there that day to overthrow our governments? Stop the transfer of power. Now, that's a great question. And let's see what Ed Krasenstein has to say. No, Enrique Tarrio didn't break windows, harm officers, or even walk into the Capitol building. No, Bin Laden didn't fly the airplanes. No, Hitler didn't personally harm anyone. That doesn't mean that Hitler and Bin Laden weren't pure evil or that Tarrio isn't a criminal. Enrique Tarrio still partook in seditious conspiracy, and that's what he was sentenced for today. People have to stop pretending that criminal conspiracies require physical acts of harm. That's not how the law works. Today's sentencing sets a precedent to convince others not to attempt to overturn an election in the future. That's valuable to the future of America. Oh, okay. So like Bin Laden, who recruited individuals to carry out an attack that killed thousands of people, or like Hitler, who recruited individuals to facilitate a mass genocide, Enrique recruited individuals to carry out a master plan to overthrow the government and stop the transfer of power. No one died, and they failed miserably. Okay, I will entertain your analogy that you don't need to be present to commit violent or criminal acts. But that would imply that he sent out orders to individuals to carry out his plan for him, and that those individuals went out and rallied people at the Capitol to orchestrate his plan, which was to stop the transfer of power. But that didn't happen. And the prosecuting attorneys even agreed in court that Enrique did not plan, nor did he give orders to individuals to rally people to storm the Capitol. The biggest challenge prosecutors faced was convincing a jury that Tarrio, the former Proud Boys chairman, was part of the conspiracy, given that he spent January 6th at a hotel in Baltimore after he was banned from Washington, D.C. the day before. Tarrio, in encrypted messages revealed during the trial, acknowledged receiving a message from someone who wanted to storm the Capitol, but did not directly endorse that plan, and prosecutors seem to concede that much of what happened on January 6th happened spontaneously. So, if Enrique wasn't there in person on January 6th, nor did he orchestrate a plan to undermine our democracy by stopping the transfer of power, How do you find him guilty of seditious conspiracy? Well, if we go back to that article and read the last paragraph, NBC spells it out for us. What they were able to show was that Tarrio said he wanted a spectacle on January 6th and that he celebrated the attack on the Capitol after it happened, giving the Proud Boys credit for the breach. So, Enrique is guilty of seditious conspiracy not because he was there leading the charge, nor is it because he sat down with other individuals of the Proud Boys to orchestrate a plan to stop the transfer of power. He is guilty of seditious conspiracy because he said he wanted to see, and this is me editorializing, a massive event of solidarity behind what he thinks was an unfair election. Spectacle is a very vague word, and I think the prosecution took it out of context. And the fact that he celebrated the protest on January 6th and smugly took credit, that's why he's guilty of seditious conspiracy. Not because he committed crimes, but because the government saw him as a political adversary and they knew a jury in Washington, D.C. would convict him of a crime for simply spitting on the streets. Enrique Tarrio is a political prisoner. He should have never been convicted of these crimes, and the fact that the judge gave him 22 years shows that our justice system is compromised. And all you have to do is look at what happened on January 20th of 2017 when Trump was being inaugurated to see the hypocrisy that is being committed by the Washington, D.C. judicial system.
Let's compare the January 6th quote-unquote insurrection to the riots on January 20th, 2017, Trump's inauguration day. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Antifa anarchists and communists rioted and committed arson on J20. They threw rocks, smashed windows, assaulted police with projectiles, and set SUVs and limousines on fire, destroying them, all in hopes of stopping the peaceful transfer of power after the lawful election of President Donald J. Trump.
Epic.
235 J20 suspects were charged with various felonies and were liable to serve between 25 and 70 years in prison, with fines as high as $25,000. But a funny thing happened on the way to justice. They were quickly bonded out, and then the judges rigged the cases to free the defendants. An example? U.S. Superior Court presiding judge Lynn Leibovitz, a George Bush Jr. appointee, forbade the prosecution from using phrases like Antifa and Black Bloc, and just before deliberations threw out the felony riot charges. Just 2 defendants were convicted, but Leibovitz suspended their sentences. Only one of the 235 defendants, Dane Powell, did any jail time, and it was only for 4 months. Let's contrast that with what happened at the January 6th protest to stop the Electoral College count and ensuing Big Steal. The J6 protesters weren't bonded out, and some are in solitary confinement. The feds arrested more than 570 January 6 protesters, more than twice as many as they arrested for the January 20th mayhem, and charged many with quote-unquote civil disorder, obstruction of an official proceeding, and violent entry into the Capitol building. Nicholas Stix writes, J20 rioters did exactly what judges and prosecutors have accused the J6 defendants of doing. The rioting communists tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power after a lawful election. This is life in the anarcho-tyranny, as Sam Francis described it, in which criminals aren't punished, which is why it's anarchy, but the innocent are, which is why it's tyranny.
Can you believe that shit? No, and not only did no one get convicted for burning down DC on January 20th, but DC in April of 2021 paid out settlements of $1.6 million to rioters who burnt down DC. That's fucking insane. And if you're saying, well, that's not comparable because no one was calling for the electors to defy the voice of the people in 2017, that's not true.
Donald Trump getting one step closer to officially becoming the next president of the United States today. All 538 members of the Electoral College casting their ballots across the country. The typically ceremonial process in the spotlight, since some are urging electors to go rogue and block Trump from the office. For that to happen, though, 37 Republican electors must switch their votes, a scenario seen as highly unlikely.
Republican members of the Electoral College, this message is for you. As you know, our founding fathers built the Electoral College to safeguard the American people from the dangers of a demagogue and to ensure that the presidency only goes to someone who is to an eminent degree endowed with the requisite qualifications.
an eminent degree, someone who is highly qualified for the job.
The Electoral College was created specifically to prevent an unfit candidate from becoming president.
There are 538 members of the Electoral College. You
and just 36 other conscientious Republican electors can make a difference.
By voting your conscience on December 19th.
And thereby shaping
Defy the will of the people?
I'm not asking you to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yes, you are.
I'm not asking you to vote for Hillary Clinton.
I'm not asking you to vote for Hillary.
Is that fucking Moby?
As you know, the Constitution gives electors the right to vote for any eligible person.
Any eligible person, no matter which party they belong to.
But it should certainly be someone you consider especially competent.
Especially competent to serve as President of the United States of America.
By voting your conscience, you and other brave Republican electors can give the House of Representatives the option to select a qualified candidate for the presidency.
I stand with you.
I stand with you.
I stand with you.
I stand with you in support and solidarity with conservatives, independents, and liberals.
And all citizens of the United States.
The American people trust that your voice speaks for us all.
And that you will make yourself heard through the constitutional responsibility granted to you by Alexander Hamilton himself.
What is evident is that Donald Trump lacks more than the qualifications to be president.
He lacks the necessary stability.
And clearly the respect for the Constitution of our great nation.
You have the position,
the authority,
and the opportunity to go down in the books as an American hero
who changed the course of history.
And you have my respect.
You have my respect. You have my respect.
For your patriotism
and service to the American people.
Can you believe that shit? They were asking the electors to defy the will of the people. The hypocrisy. You know, now I know people are going to say, well, that's just whataboutism. Because that's the new buzzword for dismissing arguments. Whataboutism. You know, and I understand when someone makes a ridiculous comparison that has nothing to do with the argument but tries to tie it in somehow. And that's a perfect situation to use the word whataboutism. However, when the comparison is tit for tat and shows outcomes from one situation versus another, it's no longer whataboutism, but rather an argument to demonstrate the hypocrisy inside that view. But I will leave you with a whataboutism that you can complain about. So, Enrique Tarrio was convicted of seditious conspiracy because he orchestrated an event to storm the Capitol to stop the transfer of power. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Now, if you think that was a justifiable sentence, what about Shannon Brandant? September of 2022 in North Dakota, Shannon Brandant killed 18-year-old Kayler Ellingson by running him over with his SUV. The killing was politically motivated. Brandant, after an argument with Ellingson, began to chase him with his SUV. While Ellingson, the 18-year-old boy, was calling his mother for help, Brandant ran him over, killing Ellingson. Brandant, after leaving the scene, called 911 to let them know that he had ran over a teen who was part of a Republican extremist group and was in the process of calling his extremist buddies to come attack Brandant before he ran the teen over. On September 8th, Brandant was found guilty of manslaughter. Not murder, but manslaughter. And he was sentenced to 5 years in prison with credits of 1 year served. How can you justify 22 years in prison for Enrique Tarrio, who did not kill, violently attack, or threaten anyone, when a man who committed a politically motivated murder gets 5 fucking years in prison? How do you justify that? There's your fucking whataboutism. And that ends the big lead.